Before I start any of my talks about Juliet Lowe, I like to find out who in my audience is a Girl Scout right now. Excellent. Yes, lifetime members. Excellent. Who was a Girl Scout growing up? I don't expect you to raise. Or even had a Girl Scout troop. You can keep your hands up. Who has a cousin who's a Girl Scout? A sister, a Girl Scout? Who eats Girl Scout cookies? Aha, everybody's got their hand up. So I like to find out who in my audience knows a little bit about Girl Scouting in the US, and also just who will appreciate Juliet Gordon Lowe. I just want to make sure you realize that I am not trying to be a historian. I am a family member who is sharing some personal artifacts. So I am trying my best to share with you some wonderful things that I'm very proud of in Scouting. Some of you may know more about Scouting and history, or the combination, but this is my chance to just share with you some personal belongings. More than 59 million American women have enjoyed Girl Scouts during their childhood, and the number just keeps growing. And it was all started by Juliet McGill, her middle name, Kinsey. Gordon was her maiden name, and Lowe was her married name. And she was born on Halloween, which is pretty close to now. A lot of times Girl Scout troops will have events in their town celebrating Juliet's birthday. Before I start to share with you her history, I want to draw in your imagination a picture of what I think is an amazing character. She was full of energy, maybe even a little hyper as a child, right through her adult life. Her mother's letters describe Juliet as quite a handful, not the best student, and rather stubborn. I think if Juliet had lived today, she would probably have been diagnosed with something they call ADD, attention deficit disorder now. She was because she was incredibly creative in the arts, considered a little absent-minded, and which in today's terms would be called easily distracted. She was very uninhibited, very impulsive, quick to attempt anything she just felt like trying. When someone with ADD picks out a passion or interest, they literally can hyper-focus on that task. And I would say bringing Girl Scouts to the United States was that great focus. She followed through, making sure it would be a success. Girls and women back then were polishing their skills to be housewives. Juliet, almost ahead of her time, encouraged her scouts to get out, explore, become proficient in new skills like first aid, self-defense, semaphore, survival skills, Morse code, fire building, and camping. Most of these adventures were reserved for the boys and men back there, yet Juliet Lowe modeled her first handbook after the Boy Scouts to make sure that they were able to meet the same challenges. She was very funny. She loved to be around children. She was always popular because of her antics. She loved all kinds of birds and animals, frequently bringing them home to nurse back health and to adopt them. She was very deaf most of her life, and I'll explain to you how she got into that situation a little bit later. She had a great imagination, very generous, compassionate, inclusive, and very smart. Got the picture? We got Daisy. Juliet McGill Kinsey Gordon Lowe was born on Halloween, October 31st, 1860, in Savannah, Georgia. She was known as Daisy to her family and friends from the first days her uncle saw her and said, "I bet she's going to be a Daisy," and it stuck. The Gordons family were very influential in the industry, government, military and humanitarian organizations. Her father, William Washington Gordon II, was a Confederate captain in the American Civil War and a brigadier general during the Spanish-American War. Her grandfather, W.W. Gordon I, was the first from Georgia to graduate from the U.S. Military Academy in 1815. He was elected mayor of Savannah and then to the House of Representatives and then to the Georgia Senate. He founded and served as president of the Central Railroad Banking Company, which would later become the Central Georgia Railroad. So you know she's coming from a family with a lot of civic-minded and volunteer efforts. Her mother, Eleanor Kinsey Gordon, was known as Nellie, and she was the granddaughter of John Kinsey, an Indian agent from Fort Winnebago, Wisconsin, and who later played a very important role of founding Chicago, Illinois. Their home is considered from 1804. This is Daisy's grandmother, was considered to be the first house built near the mouth of the Chicago River. Daisy's great-grandmother, Eleanor Kinsey, had been captured by the Native Americans at the age of 9. Even though she was captive, she was always joyful, so the Native Americans called her Little Ship Under Full Sail. She was adopted and made the daughter of a Seneca chief called Chief Corn Planter, and she stayed with the tribe, but eventually he asked to give Eleanor whatever she wanted, and she chose to go back home. And so the Seneca chief let her go, and she went back to the Kinsey family. If you're curious about that heritage in Chicago, a book was written by Juliet Kinsey about the life of the early days in the Northwest, and it's called Wabam. And that is all about Juliet Gordon Lowe's mother's side of the family in Chicago. Daisy inherited both traits from personalities from both of her parents. Like her mother, she included lots of charm and guts and wit, but she also had her father's instinct for leadership. Daisy was an infant shortly before the Civil War, and her childhood was complicated by the war efforts. Her parents were conflicting on the subject of slavery. Her father was a Georgian-born Southern slave owner, and he believed the secession to the South. But the mother, her whole family was with the Union, and her Northern-born mother believed in abolition. While Daisy's father was joining the war efforts on behalf of the South, her maternal relatives were enlisting in the militia in the North. So here was a family in Savannah and a very prominent family with very conflicting household conversations, as you can imagine. During the war, as it dragged on, Daisy's mother became increasingly despondent about her husband's absence and the ability to provide for the family. And by the time Daisy was 4, the South had lost the war, and the little girl, Daisy, malnourished and sickly, still had not seen her father more than a few days. So her mother and sisters, under the protection of Sherman, moved the family to Illinois, and she stayed with her maternal grandparents up in Chicago until it was over. But because Daisy's mother had northern ties, they were able to continue getting their business going very quickly after the war, and the Belmont cotton plantation got going quickly. The birthplace of Juliet Lowe is Oglethorpe Street in Savannah, Georgia. The Gordon House was completed in 1821 and is an outstanding example of Regency architecture. It was saved from demolition by the Girl Scouts and then returned to its glory of the 1886 style. It's Savannah's first historic landmark. It's a remarkable place, and they're continuing to do renovations. The whole front step and area were just pulled off and just reopened this year, that they had to redo the whole steps, but they're back the way they were. I'll stop to show you that it does snow in Savannah, and this was Daisy's sled. And it says made in Paris, Maine, number 69. So my grandmother, Eleanor McPherson, who was the daughter of Daisy's sister, was very inspirational in making sure this property turned back to the Girl Scouts and worked very hard and had quite a few things that belonged to the house and returned them to the house. Daisy had a happy childhood. As a young girl, she enjoyed helping people. She and her sisters and her cousins organized sewing clubs, made clothing for the poor families in their town. Her siblings often commented on her inability to keep track of time and her frequent experiments that went awry, but lots of acts of kindness and a few disasters. She got the nickname of Crazy Daisy. This is a picture of her family. Mabel, my grandmother, was a daughter of Eleanor. She attended boarding school at Virginia Female Institute, Edge Hill School, run by Thomas Jefferson's granddaughters, the Mrs. Randolph and Miss Emmett. And then she went to Miss Emmett School in Morristown, New Jersey. She went to a French finishing school. And she went to Mademoiselle Charbonnier's in New York City. And then following her years at school, she traveled extensively in Europe as well as in the United States. There's a portrait that is in the National Portrait Gallery that was done of her at age 27. Take a good look at that picture, and then you look at the picture you'll see of her in her Girl Scout uniform. She's almost frightening looking with that military look, but she was an absolutely beautiful, gentle, nature-loving person. So she liked the uniform because she felt it brought her clout, and she was very proud of it. Here she is in Wales, and about 28 years old in London. Great hat. On December 22nd, 1886, Juliet Lowe married a Britisher by the name of William Mackay Lowe. She was Gordon then. She married him. She became Lowe. He was known as Willie. And he was the son of a very wealthy cotton merchant whose family had homes in Savannah and in England. They dated for 4 years before getting married, but Daisy's parents did not approve of Willie Lowe because Daisy's father had always wanted his daughter to marry a man who was accustomed to hard work and not dependent on family wealth. This was his house in Savannah, and they lived there for several years before moving to England. Before her marriage, Juliet suffered chronic ear infections. She lost most of her hearing in one ear because of improper treatment of silver nitrate, which she lost hearing in the other ear from a grain of good luck rice that people were throwing, and it became lodged in her ear. And while the doctor was trying to retrieve the piece of rice, he punctured her eardrum. Nevertheless, she persevered and did not let her disabilities stop her from attaining her goals. Willie and Daisy remained for about a year in their family's house in Savannah and then moved to England, and shortly thereafter they bought a country estate in called Wellesbourne, and it was in Warwickshire, where it became their primary residence. She adapted easily to the life of the English gentry. She was presented to the Queen at court. She attended and hosted house parties, traveled extensively. She rode with the hounds. She went fly fishing, summered on the grouse moors, and had a townhouse in London when in season. Although the couple moved to England, she divided her time back and forth between the British Isles and America, traveling frequently back and forth. Unfortunately, the marriage was not a loving, devoted relationship that she had witnessed from her parents. Willie, having a large inheritance, spent money wildly. Large amounts of time were spent at the racetracks. He dabbled with raising horses, made a full-time job of gallivanting around England and Scotland with the wealthy and the gregarious. The Lowes had no children. As the years passed, they increasingly spent time apart, and there was evidence of growing unhappiness in their marriage. In 1902, Willie abandoned his wife for another woman, asked for divorce, and they were in the process of a divorce when he died suddenly of paralysis in 1905. He left the bulk of his estate to his mistress. However, Daisy's sister was married to a lawyer in London, Mabel, and she was contested the will, and luckily the court sided with her. And then she spent the next few years globetrotting throughout Europe, Egypt, and India. She even traveled up the Nile where white women had not gone, and she climbed the Great Pyramid. She enrolled in art school in Paris to further her passion with skills in sculpture. So Juliet spent several years searching for something useful to do with her life. Luckily, that ended while attending a luncheon in 1911 when she met Lord Robert Stevenson Smith Baden-Powell, BP. This is Olave's wife, BP, or Baden-Powell on the left, and Aunt Daisy on the right. She became keenly interested in the scouting movement, and during that year, she organized a troop of Girl Guides for poor girls at her estate in Scotland. It was Glen Lyon, and then founded 2 more troops in London. And then his sister Agnes and Olave started the whole Girl Guide movement in Great Britain. So it's almost happening at the same time. Then on March 12th, 1912, Daisy established the first Girl Scout troop in the United States, and it was in her native Savannah. This was the first Girl Scout headquarters. Through her steadfast promotion, the movement grew quickly, and becoming Girl Scouts of America in 1913, the organization was incorporated in 1915 with the national headquarters in Washington, D.C. By 1916, the Girl Scouts had 7,000 members, and shortly thereafter, they were able to pay workers for a staff in a national office. Daisy served as president until 1920, when she was bestowed the rightful title of founder. Her goddaughter, Anne Hyde Choate, took over the role as president. In developing the Girl Scout movement in the United States, Juliet brought together girls of all backgrounds into the outdoors and giving them the opportunity of self-reliance and resourcefulness. She encouraged girls to prepare not only for traditional homemaking, but also for possible future roles as professional women in the arts, sciences, and business, and for active citizenship outside the United States. Girl Scouting welcomed girls with all disabilities at that time, and they were included. Back then, they were probably excluded from activities. Girl Scouts opened the door for anybody with any disabilities. This idea seemed quite natural to Juliet, who never let deafness, her back problems, and later cancer keep her from a full participation in life. For 15 years, Daisy devoted her time, energy, and finances to the movement. She elicited major support and contributions from communities around, as well as frequent guests. She was a frequent guest at troop campfires. She truly believed that peace could come to the world through women communicating internationally. By maintaining contact overseas with the Girl Guides and the Girl Scouts during World War I, she and Helen Starrow helped lay the foundation for the World Association of Girl Guides and Girl Scouts. That's known as WAGS. WAGS, as it is known today, reaches 10 million girls and young women in 145 countries. Back then it was just England and the United States. This organization provides a mechanism for young women around the world to share ideas and culture. There are 4 world centers. One is Pax Lodge in London. One is in India called Saigon. Our chalet that was built by, paid for, and the location selected by Helen Starrow is in Switzerland. And there's also our cabana in Mexico. There's a 5th one just being built, and I'm embarrassed to say I'm not sure where it is. In 1923, Daisy contracted cancer. She kept her illness a secret and dauntlessly continued her efforts. She was instrumental in organizing the World Girl Scout Camp in the United States in 1926. Less than a year later, January 17, 1927, Juliet Gordon Lowe died of cancer in Savannah at the age of 66. She was buried in her uniform and also with the Silver Fish. The Silver Fish Award, I know Helen Storrow also had one is an award given by England, or the Girl Guides of England, as a volunteer gift, and it is given, it's not earned, and very few people in the United States had them, but I know Daisy had one, and Helen Storrow had one as well. The membership of Girl Scouts by this time numbered 168,000 women at the time that she died. Today there's 3.2 million Girl Scouts, 2.3 girl members, and 890,000 adults, working mostly as volunteers. And the Girl Scouts continue its mission of building girls of courage, confidence, and character, and who make the world a better place. I'm going to tell you a couple of family stories, and then I will go on to showing you some very special things that I have inherited that are just remarkable, that belong to Aunt Daisy, and we'll get a good kick out of those. She was very absent-minded. She was a good linguist, a fair poet, but on the other hand, she could not spell. She was incorrigibly unpunctual, and her favorite watch only had one hand on it. Just one hand. So she probably was never late. It is said that she invited people for a dinner and a dance at her house and forgot, and she was upstairs in bed gloomily playing bills because she couldn't hear the music. She had 3 envelopes for her bills that were to be paid this year, next year, and never. She had her favorite dog. She loved Pekingese, and my mother remembers her having this dog, and it was its real name was Chi-Chi, but the in-house family name was Stink Pot Hairy Boy, because it was a little odd. It had, its back legs were longer than the front, and it was kind of missing hair, and it looked like it had been put together, as my mother said, put together by mistake. It had terrible halitosis, and so that's why the family called him Stink Pot Hairy Boy. Daisy was very athletic from her childhood, and she was a good, strong swimmer. She was captain of a rowing team as a girl and learned to canoe as an adult, and she was also an avid tennis player. One of her special skills was standing on her head. She stood on her head every year on her birthday just to prove that she still could do it. She was always celebrating her nieces and nephews' birthdays. Remember, they wore a skirt. She had to tuck that skirt between her legs and get on her head. Nephews loved it when she would come because she would always stand on her head. And there is a story, and it's quite well documented, that she stood on her head on the boardroom at national headquarters to show off the new Girl Scout shoes that was part of the uniform. She loved to fish. Daisy's spirited was she enchanted the British, especially Rudyard Kipling. He remembered her well, pulling her from his port and cigar after dinner one night just to go out salmon fishing in his evening clothes, which he was very upset that he didn't even get to change into his fishing clothes. She was a favorite babysitter of Arthur Gordon because she would always take him out fishing. And when they would go out in the rowboat, she wore this enormous brimmed hat with this big netting for the mosquitoes, and insisted on bringing a hammer along or a mallet to rap the fish on the head so they wouldn't suffer. Daisy's driving was erratic. In fact, Rudyard Kipling was terrified to drive with her. She once accidentally drove her car into the dining room of some neighbors and quickly retreated to call her brother, who was a lawyer. And he asked, did you inquire about repairs? And she said, no, I didn't want to interrupt their dinner. Well, she literally placed the car in the dining room, but she didn't want to interrupt their dinner, but I think she did. But she quickly left, ran home, told her brother a turkey tale. This is one of my family's favorite stories. Each year at Thanksgiving, the Gordons raised a turkey, and all became very fond of him, even calling him Old Tom. And when the day for Old Tom became Thanksgiving dinner, Daisy just begged that her father let her try an anesthesia of some sort, chloroform, instead of chopping his head off. So they finally said okay, and they put poor Tom, they thought, permanently asleep, plucked him, and put him in the cold storage. They did not, however, cut off his head. And the next morning, when they went to go get him for cooking, he was very much alive and very, very mad and ran around the whole kitchen and put the cook right up on top of the table. And Daisy was never allowed to use chloroform again. And old Tom had to have his head chopped off. But it's always been a family story on our side about Thanksgiving and the turkey. Taffy. Because Daisy's hair was soft brown color as taffy, she let her cousins braid her hair with taffy. And needless to say, her mother was furious and she had to cut her hair all off short to get the taffy out. My mother, Helen, remembers Daisy when she was about 6. My mother was about 6, and Daisy would come and visit in New Jersey, where my mother was brought up. And after dinner, a lot of music was created, especially with a recorder and piano. And my mother remembers Daisy walking in, and because she was deaf, she would put her teeth on the soundboard of the piano like this, all through the music. And my mother at age 6 just looked at this lady, but she never forgot. Aunt Daisy said the best way she could hear was through the jawbone and up into her hearing on the inside of her ear. So she was not afraid to do anything she plumb felt like doing. Daisy's powers of persuasion. Once she was knitting on a trolley and dropped her ball of yarn out the door, and she convinced the driver to back up the trolley while she rolled up her yarn. So no wonder she was able to convince anybody to start Girl Scouting. During the Civil War, while Daisy's father was out leading the lines as a Confederate soldier, Sherman would frequently visit the Gordon house. This was because her mother's close ties to the North, and her father and her grandfather had also studied in the North. Daisy loved to crawl up on Sherman's lap and receive a piece of sugar, something that was very scarce in that time. One time, Daisy ran her hands through Sherman's hair and proclaimed, "Mama, I can't find any horns on his head," because she had been led to believe that by her father's side that this man was related to the devil. Daisy was very artistic. This is a picture, this is a photo of a still that she did. She loved sculpture. That was her favorite medium. And that is a picture of a sculpture of her goddaughter. It's a bust of her grandfather, W.W. Gordon. This is a picture of Peggy Gordon Seiler and her brother Sammy with Juliet's parrot. And I say that slowly and specifically because 2 people in this room went to college with Peggy Gordon Seiler, and she was the niece of Daisy Lowe. And so that's a really neat picture that Peggy sent me of Daisy with Polly Poons, one of her favorite parrots. It is said that the parrot slept on her chest at night. This is a picture of Daisy with one of her many birds that she loved. There's another one of her favorite, that's Polly Poons again. All right, I'm going to switch gears here a little bit. Daisy could take on anything and do it well. And one time she thought that her tea tray was a little boring, so she hand carved it to make it look pretty. And this is a tea tray that she hand carved. I think her carving skills came when her husband wasn't around, and there was a very famous woman who carved altars and mantles in the town where their estate was in England. And I think she became very good friends of hers in Warwickshire. And that's how she learned to carve. And my father's pretty critical about woodcrafting and said she did a great job. So I believe him. This is a great story. When we used to grow up and get an anniversary present for our parents when they were coming up for their anniversary, we'd probably go in and get a nice box of chocolates and hope that they'd share them with us, or a card or something. Daisy, for her parents' anniversary, had her blacksmith teach her how to work with iron. And she handcrafted these iron great gates. And they are in Savannah now. They have her parents' initials on either side. But she literally got taught how to work the iron, hammer it, and when she got done, her dresses did not fit very well. She had such strong muscles in the arms. But what an inspiration for Girl Scouts to know. If any girl, if you want to try something and do something, do it. Daisy had a patent for a liquid container. She had several patents, but this one is for a liquid container for use in a garbage can or the like. How many here have patents? I just can't imagine going out and getting a patent today, but she did it. This was her sled. I showed it to you before with a picture of the Savannah house in snow. When Daisy traveled back and forth between Savannah and England, and probably also up and down the East Coast, she traveled with an overnight case. And this overnight case is covered with a canvas. And inside is a leather container with lots of seals on it that you would seal everything with wax to show it hadn't been opened. Inside are all sorts of compartments, and each compartment holds something that Daisy would really need when she was out and about, especially overnight. And some of the items that were in that container I have here. I didn't bring them all, but some. And I want to share them with you, and hopefully I can have you guess what they are before I show you the picture. Remember, she did have help moving her things, and she was gone for a bit of time. Going across the ocean was at least 12, 14 days on one of the Cunard lines, and then once she got to Liverpool, she would go to her house, and then she would be there for a while. So you would bring everything you'd want and set it up on your bureau. There was a full manicure set, per se, clippers, files, things that you would need, and they fit in the side container. On everything is her monogram. So on this, and I don't know if I have a pointer, but there's a J in the middle, there's a big M, and there's a great big G. So those are her initials on everything. For instance, on this. This is, what do you suppose she carried in this?
Pills.
So what?
Pills.
Pills. She had candlesticks. Gotta have them when you go overnight. A, should your host or hostess lose power, but B, ambiance. What do you suppose this is? I don't travel with one.
Scale.
It is a scale, but what would you measure with it? It's a postage scale. So you would travel and measure the weight of your letter and be able to leave the right postage on it. This is a lamp, and I've never really been able to understand it fully. I think my grandmother probably took the plug off of it and used it for something else, but there was a plug. This is the switch that you would turn it off and on. Got her initials on it. The bulb would go in here, has kind of feet that come out on the bottom. And so you would bring your own, we are prepared, right? Girl Scouts are, you bring your own lamp and have it. I think also you could use it on a train, or if you were traveling overnight on a train. She had several hairbrushes, Hers were replaceable. She had a box, several backups from the Army Navy store where you would buy a backup hairbrush when this one wore out, probably boar's hair. This is something that she wore around her neck. It wasn't part of this whole package, but inside, pops open, spring-loaded, is an address book. It has a little graphite pencil, and then she happened to write on this one, Sir Arthur Hunter of Bombay, the Army Navy store. What do you suppose this is? We have to be prepared. It's a corkscrew. Now, I have to explain to young Girl Scouts that many of the bottles back then were corked. It wasn't just a bottle of wine, although I'm sure she did have her wine because she had her cup with her. This is inside this silver container is a tiny little book, a condensed calendar, 1892, and you would write down all the things one needed to do. It's a mirror that she had in this, it fit in the set. If you have candles, and if you're going to be out and about, you're going to have matches. But you don't go to the apothecary or someone and buy the matches and then put them in your match holder and keep them in there. But this would be your strike plate that you would strike the match on the top where that match is. She had a nice, pretty sharp pocket knife. I have to explain this to most children, but a shoehorn. A young person in 12 or 15 today goes, what is that? It takes them a long time to figure out, and I show them how it works. There's a silver box that fits into everything, and in it she had 2 decks of cards. So they're right, that's the little box. Dental floss. Again, children today go and get some plastic device from the store and pull it out, or those little handheld ones, but this is actually, you would go and you'd buy a new spool to replace the old one. So again, using resources wisely, I think, in some ways, better than we do today. Little kids think it's a dental device, or they have a really hard time, or they think it's a crochet hook. And I, again, have to show them how efficient it is to use a button hook, but what?
It's a button hook.
Right, I'm showing you that children think it's something you use in a dentist, but I have to show them how.
It is a button hook.
Yes, it is, and show them how well it works. And if you had a lot of buttons on boots and clothing, it's very efficient. It is a button, but children think they've never seen one, so they think it's something you use in a dentist. That's the only thing they've seen. This is a curling iron, and this is the curling iron part, and you would put a fuel in the bottom of this, and then light the wick. But it does fold down. It is a travel one, so it all goes neatly into this pack. There were many bottles in this case, and they have her initials on the top, and inside is a cork for all sorts of fluids you might want to have, lotions or things you would pick up at the apothecary and fill up and take with you. But what's really cool, I think, is that when the cork is gone, you don't throw the bottle away. You go and get a new cork. So the cork is replaceable with a little spring on top. You put a new cork in and you keep the bottle going. So unlike our recycle bin, which is always very full, they tend to use things a little more long-lasting. I don't think I use the right word on that, but they didn't throw out as much. What do you suppose this is? it fits very nicely in this container. It's a doorstop, and probably for security on a train traveling across Europe or anywhere else, but if somebody put those in my floor, I'd have a hard time, but it's a doorstop. Clothes brush. I tend to just take some duct tape, turn it around backwards so the sticky side is up and kind of tap a little bit, but to get the cat fur off, right? A vase. What is this? It is a glove stretcher. Again, we all travel with one, right? Or everywhere we go.
Sure.
Yes.
We even travel with gloves.
That's right, we don't even have the gloves anymore, but should you wash them and they get too small, you would stretch them out so
We
that
had
you
one of
could.
those, but they were wooden.
Yes, yes, well, I guess Daisy traveled in style. She did. I'm very proud of Daisy, being a meteorologist myself. She traveled with a barometer, which of course,
I wish I had.
it's wonderful because you mechanically can see change just by tapping on it, as opposed to hearing a number and trying to remember the number. So she traveled with a barometer, and again had her initials on it. She also had a clock. The Presidential Medal of Freedom is the highest honor that the president can bestow upon a civilian. President Barack Obama selected Juliet Gordon Lowe to receive this prestigious award posthumously May 29, 2012, and that was the year that Girl Scouts turned 100 in Girl Scouting in the United States. Daisy was an amazing woman who brought American girls an incredible program. Over the last 100 years, it's continued to grow and it's changed. This changing has been to adapt to all the evolving lifestyles of young women. In 1912, they were learning semaphore and Morse code, and today they're computers and web design. Early years, the girls learned about aviation and dirigibles, and now it's about space travel. But some things remain the same. Camping, first aid, self-defense, service to others, and always striving to make the world a better place. As I leave you with this last picture, her favorite picture of herself. And this is with her sister's family, Airedale, taken in West Orange, New Jersey.